The miracle of the overflowing nets, it began with hospitality. Before the boats were sinking under the weight of all those fish, before the nets were filled, before the fishermen had even cast out their nets into the deep waters one more time, even before Jesus was preaching and teaching, Jesus got into a boat belonging to Simon Peter and sought some hospitality. Simon Peter, he's known as all three things, our quarterly, monthly reminder that Christians are really well equipped to use the names of someone after experiencing a transformation. Just a reminder, we do it really well. We have that skill set. We don't get the exact exchange, but before any miraculous moment could occur, Simon Peter offered hospitality to Jesus. He let him get into his boat and he pushed him a little ways off the shore so that Jesus could teach and preach to the crowds who had gathered. As I've sat with this text this week, I've found myself more focused on what happened before the miracle and what happened after the miracle. It's called divine intervention for a reason, and I'm not in charge of that part, the miracle part. And so maybe I've been hoping that we can create the conditions for something miraculous to unfold if we look at the before. And maybe we can pay attention to the miracles that are happening if we look for the signs that they've occurred. And before the miracle, there was hospitality. Henry Nouwen was a Dutch priest who wrote The Wounded Healer. He was a part of a shift in understanding that those who help others are often called to that vocation through the crucible of their own pain. And that isn't a hindrance so long as enough healing has happened, but actually a real gift that can be offered to others. Nouwen describes hospitality in this way. He describes it as the creation of a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them a space where change can take place. He writes that we cannot change the world with a new plan, project, or idea. We cannot even change other people by our own convictions, stories, or advice and proposals. But we can offer space where people are encouraged to disarm themselves, to lay aside their occupations and preoccupations, to listen with attention and care to the voices speaking in their own center. This is the space that Simon Peter made possible that day by the lake. He quite literally opened the space for Jesus and the crowds to enter and become friends with one another. He offered the space where people could listen to Jesus and to the echoes of their own joys and pains, their own hurts and hopes that were reverberating around their own hearts. I understood hospitality differently when I experienced it through the lens of offering sanctuary work. Hospitality, creating space where people can let down their guard, breathe freely, and truly encounter one another, it is no small thing. From coffee hour, nourishment, to a fierce and protected commitment to all are welcome, hospitality is a central part of our call as Christians. To offer hospitality in ways that build relationship between us and the divine, as Simon Peter did, that is the beginning of a miracle. So what comes next? Jesus makes a request of Simon Peter. And here's what had me breathing a little easier this week. Jesus asked Simon Peter to do something that he already knew how to do. It was a weird time to do it. Fishing happened at night. It didn't totally make sense to Peter. They had been trying for hours and hours and hours already. What had really changed? But it wasn't outside of Peter's ability. In fact, in this case, it was actually something that Simon Peter had done 1,000,000 times before in a slightly different way. Like making a phone call is familiar, but making a phone call to a legislator might feel a little uncomfortable. Like visiting a friend is familiar, but in the midst of crisis, maybe can feel a little less comfortable. Jesus asked Simon Peter to do something familiar in a little bit of a different way. We're getting closer and closer to the miracle here. The final instruction from Jesus is for the fishermen to go into the deep water. Reverend Dr. Cheryl Lindsay, UCC Minister for Worship and Theology, writes, an African proverb tells us, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Luke's framing tells us, if you want to go through the motions, go shallow. If you want to fill your nets, go deep. When you are hoping to receive wisdom from God, go into the deep. Our scripture tells us, when you are feeling weary with the weight of the world, no hope on the horizon, go into the deep. When you are in search of a miracle, go into the deep. As I know so many of us are feeling overwhelmed with the speed and violence of this new administration, the strategy of flooding the zone is counting on us to remain on the surface, paddling as fast as we possibly can. But like the ocean waves that crash onto the shore, we are invited to dive beneath, to find the areas of our life and work that are familiar, but to go deeper than we ever have before. I know, too, that lives have not stopped in these last weeks, for even as the neon flash of news has continued in our state, our nation, our world, so much of life is not covered in the headlines, but shows up in emails and texts and conversations with those we love the most. Jesus' invitation to Simon Peter wasn't just a call to action. It was also a call to introspection and transformation. By choosing to engage fully in the moment and embrace the vulnerability that comes with it, Simon Peter opened himself to the miracle that was about to unfold. There's a good reason we don't go into the deep. Simon Peter's response to this miracle reminds us that it is overwhelmingly vulnerable. Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. He cries as the fish fill the nets again and again. Jesus recognizes this as a fear response and invites Simon to stay in that place of depth and vulnerability just a little longer. Jesus' response isn't a condemnation of fear, but a reminder that in order to grow spiritually and connect more fully with the world, one must be willing to dive beneath the surface of daily life, past distractions, and into the core of what we believe, what we fear, what we hope, and what we are capable of. And so now I'm going to skip right over the miracle and go to the end. I talked to a friend this week about the text, and she expressed some frustration that the disciples just left the fish. Anyone else feel annoyed by that? The miracle is complete. There's a massive, multiple boats almost sank to bring this in, catch on the shore, and everyone just walks away. It's a poetic ending, sure, but the disciples really just left all that food in a place where there was so much hunger. Last year, our dog Jerry found and rolled in a dead, mostly decomposed fish in January. If you're doing the math, that's about 4 months after that fish. I don't know how it was still there. She got about 30 baths that day with every combination of liquid and powder and solution, everything, every internet hack that we could find, we tried on that poor dog. She was terrified to walk by the bathroom for weeks. All I know is that there is no way the disciples left a bunch of fish on that shore to decompose, because Jesus nor anyone else would be welcomed downwind for generations after generations to come if they left that there. So this isn't in the text, but here's what I think happened. I think that this was the first feeding of the 5,000. The miraculous feeding where everyone showed up with a couple loaves and a couple fish, and 5,000 plus were fed It's recorded a few chapters later, but I think what part of those soon-to-be disciples heard when Jesus was speaking about the good news while they were cleaning their nets was this call to abundance and radical sharing. The ways of God have so much more to do with what we can offer one another than with the ways of capitalism that we are indoctrinated into every moment of every day. And the abundance that the disciples experienced certainly isn't a sign that you should go capitalize on it, become a consultant to other fishermen in the area. It isn't a sign that you should be put in charge of a new department to take away even more from those who have so little. In fact, it is a sign that you are called to share and share abundantly. To give directly to those who are there, to hear a word of hope, knowing the way that injustice works. They were probably hungry for hope and probably hungry as well. While the beginning of the story offered the conditions for a miracle, the ending reminds us that there are things we can look for to know that we are in a miracle already. Some signs might be abundance, full bellies and hearts, and people embracing a radical way of living. One that values people over profits, well-being over wealth, and purpose over possession. I think I started dwelling on these beginnings and endings of this miracle because I was hoping for 1 or 2 or 50 miracles per hour in the last couple of weeks. But through the process of preparing this sermon, through the process of reading and praying about miracles, I'm feeling less and less attached to that magic, big reveal moment that we call a miracle. I don't think I need something wild and truly beyond human possibility to have happened for this moment of abundance to be meaningful, for this encounter with God to be meaningful. Some of that is because there will always be a little skeptical part of my brain that will ask, so did Jesus make the fish appear out of nowhere? Did he call over a whole school of fish at just the right time? Did he know where the fish actually were? Was this story mostly metaphor, or like the genre of fishing tales seem to require, did it grow in its telling? Maybe none of you were thinking any of those things, but I always am as I read about miracles. Theologically, however, the real issue is that if I depend too much on miracles to remind me of God's presence, where does it leave me when there isn't an expression of God's presence? If there weren't any fish, would it have meant that God wasn't there? My faith tells me that God was with the people on the shore and in the boats, regardless of the number of fish that they caught. Because God is present with us always, on miraculous days and ordinary days, on good days and on terrible days. Beloved community, I don't know if we always catch the exact moment when God's meaningful, miraculous presence manifests among us. I don't know if we always catch it. Whether we call it a miracle or something else, it's not as obvious or as smelly as a boat full of fish most of the time. But I hope, especially in these times, that we can prepare the way for something miraculous and remind each other again and again and again when it happens. May it be so. Amen.